Before Trump, Republicans were guilty of campaigning as conservatives and they get elected and do nothing, or they work with the Democrats to basically undermine their base.
Redcoats. Good call, Dennis. Now do politicians that sell us out for profit. Oh, and just wait until I tell you what Dennis is selling us out for. This one's pretty bad. We've got lots to do. Come on, let's go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to this special breaking news installment. From very high above, all the puerile and bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media, this is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. There are very few things that I enjoy more on this program than breaking news and investigative journalism. And the reason for that is I get to tell you the truth that other folks in the media either refuse or can't tell you. And usually, with my particular brand of journalism, I get to show you the truth of the people doing it in their own words. And I have to tell you, my friends, I enjoy exposing people immensely. Well, anyhow, it's been a few days since I've been able to do that for you, and so on today's episode, we're going to do exactly that. Cowboy State Politics has obtained exclusive audio from a conference that was held in Florida and was attended by none other than Senate President Bo Biteman. Oh, by the way, his name really isn't Bo. His real name is Dennis. I don't know where this Bo stuff comes from, but it's not his real name. And interestingly enough, that's a pretty good place to start. Even his name is kind of a fraud. And I don't mean that, he's lying about his name. Obviously, he prefers to be called Bo rather than by his given name of Dennis. But what I am saying is that it is not entirely accurate. It is not entirely transparent. And it kind of fits with just about everything surrounding Bo Biteman. He plays himself off as a conservative. And then, in order to gain the center seat in the Wyoming Senate, he gives 7 of the 10 committees to the Redcoats. All the while, we're all told, don't worry, I've got everything handled. Everything is under control. Meanwhile, back on the ranch, conservative bill after conservative bill met its demise in the Wyoming Senate. Just one example out of many, the anti-illegal immigration bill. Senate File 124 was dismantled in committee and then died a painful death on the floor of the Senate. That was President Trump's chief issue during the campaign, stopping illegal immigration, closing the border. So you would think that a bill in the Wyoming legislature to prevent illegal immigration, or at the very least prosecute those people who are in our country illegally and make their way into the state of Wyoming, would be a top number one issue for Bo Biteman, considering how often he likes to talk about President Trump and drop his name at every opportunity, which incidentally, at this conference, which Cowboy State Politics got the audio from, he does exactly that in the course of his 10-minute speech. But that's pretty irrelevant to what we're talking about in today's episode. So really, there's very little that's actually authentic about Bo Biteman's conservatism or what he tells his constituents, as you'll hear in today's episode. So let's go ahead and get to it. There are very few things more toxic, pun intended, all the way around, than nuclear waste. Nobody in their right mind would buy a piece of property next to a nuclear waste dump. No matter how quote-unquote safe it is or not, you just wouldn't do it. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm certain that it probably wouldn't do a heck of a lot for your property values. And you can probably forget about reselling whatever it is that you bought there, because it's next to a nuclear waste storage facility, or dump. So why then would anyone be in favor of bringing nuclear waste to Wyoming? Unless you're really politically savvy, that's not exactly a winner with most voters. Please vote for me. I'm going to bring some nuclear waste to Wyoming and store it right in your backyard. I don't really see that as a winning strategy. The only logical reason why you would even think about doing that is to profit from it. I'm not suggesting that Bo Biteman would profit from bringing nuclear waste to Wyoming. I am, however, definitely suggesting that some other people absolutely would. Now, if you're interested in some of those people who might profit from such an arrangement, I suggest you take a look at a Substack that was put out by Dawn Marquardt. She did a really well-researched article that traces the financial connections between Bo Biteman, Eli Bebout, David Miller, among others. And all of it revolves around uranium and all things nuclear. There are several companies that Eli Bebout, David Miller, and Bo Biteman are all a part of, and like I said, everything revolves around uranium. I'll make sure I post some of those documents at cowboystatepolitics.com on the show content page, so you can read it for yourself and you can see that those three definitely are involved in all sorts of uranium-related businesses. Back in April, right after the legislative session, Bo Biteman and a couple of other Wyoming legislators attended the Used Fuel Management Conference that was put on by the Nuclear Energy Institute. The conference was held May 6th through the 8th in Orlando. Before I tell you about the conference and play for you what Senate President Bo Biteman said, I need to take you all the way back to this past legislative session because there was a bill that died in the legislature that's really pertinent to this whole episode. That is House Bill 16, Used Nuclear Fuel Storage Amendments. If you look at the Wyoming legislature's website, it tells you that this bill died in committee and that it was sponsored by the Minerals Committee. But that really isn't the whole picture at all. During the interim, that is, the time in between legislative sessions, different topics are assigned to the various legislative committees, one of which happens to be minerals. The idea being that whatever bill is assigned to whatever committee can be studied in depth by that committee, and then they can produce a piece of legislation that makes it to the legislative session. The whole idea is to learn more about the topic before even crafting the bill. But House Bill 16 wasn't studied by the Minerals Committee. In fact, it was just brought up in the final 3 minutes of a meeting by Representative Don Burkhart, House Chairman of the Minerals Committee in 2024. There was a piece originally written by Wyophile that was published in the Guernsey Gazette on February 4th of 2025 that talked about House Bill 16, entitled, Lawmakers Say No to Storing Nuclear Waste in Wyoming. Now, I'm sure I could have went and found the original Wyophile article on their website, but I thought it was interesting that it was published in the Guernsey Gazette, so we'll just go with that one. From that piece, and I quote, Burkhart, who did not run for another term, waited until the final minutes of a 2-day hearing in Casper in July to introduce the draft measure to the Minerals Committee. He also forbade the Legislative Service Office from sharing the draft measure publicly until days before an October hearing, leaving scant opportunity for the public to digest the proposed law and research its implications. End quote. This article was originally printed by Wyophile, so we have to take whatever they say with kind of a grain of salt and verify it. I went back to that original July Interim Minerals Committee meeting and grabbed the audio so that you could hear Chairman Burkhart introduce this bill and decide for yourself if he actually forbade the legislature from releasing a draft of this bill. However you characterize it, it sounds to me like it wasn't presented as a draft bill, but rather just kind of an idea to be tossed around, which means that there wouldn't have been a draft bill available for the public to view. But in any case, here's that audio so you can decide for yourself.
What you have in front of you is only discussion document put into, and I will handle this, Brian, if you don't mind. Okay. Only put into bill format, more for discussion. This is not a bill. It's not up before us right now, concerning spent nuclear fuel rods.
So that's what he said in the meeting. I don't know that I would go as far as Wildfile did in characterizing Burkhart's comments to mean that LSO was forbade from releasing this to the public. But now that you've heard it, you can make up your own mind. Before we go any further, and I give you the really juicy stuff that really is in today's episode, let's take a quick break and get a word in from our sponsors. Cowboy State Politics is brought to you by Morton Buildings. It doesn't really matter what type of building you're thinking about for your property, whether it's a garage or a barn or maybe something big and huge like a roping arena or a warehouse for your business. The two guys you need to talk to are Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. Their phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Are you thinking of buying or selling a piece of property? Well, if you are, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. And that agent is Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She's lived in Jackson for over 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. She sold everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So it doesn't matter if you're buying or selling, talk to a real estate agent that you can trust and that understands you. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. One more time, 307-699-3519.
Here at U.S. Coin Capital, we hear from Americans across the United States who have a growing concern about the future purchasing power of U.S. paper money. Many Americans are looking for an alternative for long-term capital. For more than 35 years, the people at U.S. Coin Capital have educated American investors on how to properly accumulate United States gold and silver coins. Call us at 1-800-878-2646 or visit us on the web, uscoincapital.com.
If you'd like to become a sponsor of Cowboy State Politics, shoot me an email. The address is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. I've got a statewide platform, and no one is going to beat my advertising rates. There isn't any other Wyoming show that's on the top 100 list of conservative podcasts you need to listen to, so you may as well advertise with me. One more time, that address is david@cowboystatepolitics.com. And now, back to what Senate President Bo Biteman really thinks about you. The bill, essentially, would have made it possible to temporarily store used nuclear fuel rods in the state of Wyoming. Now, the words temporary need to be in quotation marks because it became very clear in the October Minerals Committee interim meeting that there is no permanent storage facility in the entire country. Under current practice, whatever nuclear fuel rods are used in a nuclear reactor have to be stored on site. House Bill 16 would have made it possible to store said nuclear fuel rods at different sites, not necessarily at the location where they're being used. In other words, post House Bill 16, we could make our own nuclear waste dump. Storage facility. The other thing the bill did for Wyoming statutes is it monkeyed with the definitions of what nuclear waste is, or used nuclear fuel rods. I don't often agree with hardly anything that comes out of the Outdoor Council, but one of the representatives testified in the October Interim Minerals Committee meeting and explained it almost the same way that I would.
It appears the changes may be some attempt to suggest that spent fuel is somehow different from used fuel, or that it might not be high-level radioactive waste. In fact, and according to the NRC, the high-level radioactive waste takes two forms: spent or used reactor fuel, and waste from spent fuel after it's been reprocessed. Those are the two categories for a high-level radioactive waste. Regardless of what we call the material, the only way this material becomes less harmful, is through natural decay over tens of thousands of years.
The reason why this part of the committee meeting is important is just about everybody knows that, no pun intended, the discussion of nuclear waste in Wyoming is radioactive. The public perception of storing nuclear waste in Wyoming is overwhelmingly negative. Now, this episode really isn't about whether or not you agree with nuclear power or storing nuclear waste in Wyoming. The point of this episode is to show you that the legislature said no to storing nuclear waste here. And the president of the Wyoming Senate, when he was out of state, had, well, other ideas. But let's go back to the WildFile article for just a moment. Quote, so many questions, Gillette Republican Christopher Knapp said. I think that part of this is because although this says it came out as an interim bill, you really didn't discuss this during the interim. This came as a last-minute bill in front of us, and here we sit in a committee meeting that probably should last for days with questions to get through this. But Representative Mike Schmidt probably summed up this whole meeting the best. Quote, there's been a lot of comments today about public education, Republican Mike Schmidt of LaBarge said. Evidently, it's not getting done because I've got hundreds of emails and not one of them is in support of this project or this idea. In voting down the bill, committee members agreed they'd recommend the idea for an interim discussion later this year, adding that it may require years of discussion and extra efforts to engage with Wyoming communities. End quote. House Bill 16 was introduced into the legislature, but it didn't go any further than dying in a committee and wasn't even discussed at that. There was, however, Senate File 186, Advanced Nuclear Reactor Manufacturers Fuel Storage. That one did pass the Senate, but it was killed in the House Minerals Committee on a vote of 3-5. The reason I took you all the way back to the legislative session is just to show you that there is no way a reasonable person could conclude that the legislature was in any way interested in storing nuclear waste in Wyoming. And I don't really care what you call it, nuclear waste or used nuclear fuel rods or whatever the nomenclature you pick is. It's all the same. Highly radioactive used nuclear fuel rods. Fast forward to May in Orlando, Florida. Our legislative session had just concluded, and it was pretty clear that there really isn't an appetite for storing nuclear waste in our state. But evidently, Wyoming Senate President Bo Biteman didn't get that message, or he ignored it completely, which is probably way more likely. Speaking for you and me, here's what Bo Biteman told all of his insider crony pals about what we want in Wyoming.
We see Wyoming as the complete fuel cycle. We want to do we don't want to just mine it, ship it out of the state and forget about it. We want the whole value chain, everything, start to finish, from when we pull it out of the ground, whole fuel process, and then when we put it back in the ground possibly.
Everything, start to finish. Pull it out of the ground, use it, put the highly radioactive waste back in the ground. That's what Bo Biteman just said. Let me play it for you one more time.
We see Wyoming as the complete fuel cycle. We want to do we don't want to just mine it, ship it out of the state and forget about it. We want the whole value chain, everything, start to finish, from when we pull it out of the ground, whole fuel process, and then when we put it back in the ground possibly.
Now, is that what you got from the first 14 minutes of today's show? That everybody in the legislature, you and me and everybody's on board with this? No, that's not what that message was, and neither was it the message that came out of this past legislative session. No, he doesn't get to speak for the entire state. He's not the governor, yet anyway, and I hope he never is. But he's definitely not reflecting the opinion of most Wyoming citizens. But Bo Biteman didn't stop there. He said that the reason why the public is so against storing nuclear waste in our state doesn't have anything to do with the vast amounts of radiation. But the reason that you and I are against it is because we don't know anything. Here, listen.
Even us legislators don't know a lot about uranium, and the public certainly doesn't. They don't know anything. So
yeah, we don't know anything. And frankly, when you or I think about uranium, our mind just goes bonkers. Listen to this.
People fear what they don't know. And if they can't see it, their mind just goes bonkers, and they just think of green gas going around the ground and killing everybody. So I think that's the key, the public resistance.
Yeah, you're right. Public resistance is the problem because we don't want nuclear waste in Wyoming. The truth is, my friends, that politicians tell you one thing to your face, and then when they're out of state and they think that they're safe to talk amongst their crony pals, they say what they really think of you and me. that we're just too stupid, that we don't understand. And that is exactly what Senate President Bo Biteman said, that the public doesn't know anything. And if he had his way, we'd be storing nuclear waste in our state. Fortunately, you don't have to take my word for any of this. I played the audio of Dennis Biteman, saying exactly what he thinks about you and me. Well, that'll do it for today's installment of this breaking news episode. Have a good rest of your week, and we'll talk again on Saturday. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the program. That way, you can be notified every single time there's a brand new episode of Cowboy State Politics. And do me a favor, every time you listen to an episode, leave me a review. It really helps keep Cowboy State Politics up in all those algorithm things. For now, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.